Hello everyone, and welcome to our program. I'm Roberto Miranda, and today we have with us Reverend Marion Skeete. We welcome you, Marion, to our program.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here.
Marion is a longtime minister and now ministering here in the Boston area, and has written a very intriguing, encouraging book entitled Second Wind, Truth for the Champion in You. And I've had the privilege of reading this book recently, and I was really impacted by its content, by its depth, really, and very encouraging nature. And so I invited Marion to come and meet with us, and I hope that in the course of our interview we'll be able to speak a little bit about the book and really how it reflects her ministerial journey and her paradigm as she ministers and serves the Lord here in the Boston area. But Marion, again, I'd like to just ask you a little bit about your background, your family journey. I know you have a very interesting family background because so many of your siblings and relatives serve the Lord. It's a very ministerial family.
Yes.
And also you come from the West Indies originally, at least.
Yes.
And maybe you can just fill us in a little bit about your own personal bio so that we
Yes.
can put in the proper context.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Pastor Miranda. You're gracious. But in the 70s, there was a song called He's a Son of a Preacher Man. And my brother would get in fights in school because we lived, our parsonage, the pastor's home was so close to the school that we attended. And so it was not popular to be a preacher's kid. And so my brothers got in fights, I got in fights. You're not really fist fights, but...
I can't picture you fighting somehow.
Not necessarily fist fights. I usually have my brothers do that. But, there was this issue of not wanting to be identified. And then there was a Pentecostal element there that wasn't really popular in those days. So we weren't really happy about that. But I've come to, of course, appreciate and become a minister myself, having seen the dark side and having seen a difficult side of ministry, but having seen lives transformed. And I think that once that gets into your spirit, you can't deny it, you can't avoid it, to see lives transformed. And that's why I've been called to ministry, and I've answered that call. As you said, we do come from the Caribbean, Trinidad, La Trinidad in Spanish. And so that's a nation of rich heritage in terms of the diversity of cultures. That too has defined me as a person. I'm very multicultural. I'm very appreciative of how God moves within particular cultures and people to accomplish His purpose. I don't believe one culture has the full witness of God.
Well, that's one of the things that impressed me about your book. It's full of interesting, very realistic illustrations about the lives of people and their journeys in the Christian life. But one of the things that impressed me was the fact that it's such a diverse array of human characters that you portray throughout the different chapters. You have Asian Americans, you have African Americans, West Indians, and of course Anglo-European as well, Latinos. So I was impacted by that fact. You seem to be able to straddle and go across different kinds of cultures, and I was impacted by that.
Amen. I thank God. The word says He determines the bounds of our habitation, and so I think coming from Trinidad, such a rich heritage of people living together. It doesn't mean we don't have our problems, but appreciating that and seeing the purpose of God revealed through the various nationalities, and so that was important for me to get the stories, and it wasn't just stories. These were people that I actually have deep relationships with. And so that also, I believe, was a part of what probably has made this book, maybe, as you say, a book that many people can relate to, I believe, because of my own life journey and the beauty of that. Coming also from a background in the media, I've been also involved in the media, and kind of seeing how God has caused my life to kind of go full circle. As you might have mentioned before, we came from Trinidad to Boston. My father was invited to pastor a church in Cambridge, Mass. And so we came up. I was 13 going on 14, and so much of my formative years was in the Caribbean. Coming up was a huge culture shock. You hear, when you live in another country, you hear about the streets of gold in America. And so you come and you expect life to be a certain way. And indeed, we had a lot of that. But there was also some realities that, wow, there is poverty here. there's struggle here, and so to actually come into that reality was pretty jarring. Also to feel as, in a sense, an outsider. You're in America and yet not always feel like you belonged. But God somehow turned my situation of not fitting in, because here was a minister's kid when I was in Trinidad, didn't really fit in because I was a minister's kid, and then coming to America now and dealing with cultural differences. And that sort of began to alienate me. But it was God by divine purpose. I look back and now I could see the perspective. I could see, great perspective in that somehow God used my not fitting in to put me where he wants me to be.
Well, one of the aspects of the church right now that I consider crucial to consider is the fact that the church is so divided in the Boston area, or all over the United States. I mean, you have churches that are predominantly African American or Latino churches, even within the Latino community, which I belong to. You have Guatemalan churches or Caribbean churches or Salvadorian. Often you don't find a mix, even in the relatively limited world of Latin America or Central America.
Very true.
And the church seems to be so deeply divided these days, and yet I think that God wants to bring a witness of unity and racial reconciliation. And I think it's so important to have people like you, and maybe like myself, who also have, even though I come from the Latino world, I've been able to have those kinds of diverse experiences.
Yes, exactly.
But it seems to be such a need right now to have people who can navigate and who can feel that warmth and that goodwill toward people of different races, different ethnic backgrounds.
Absolutely. I see that in your life and ministry. I've observed that, and I think sometimes God uses the people that the people who don't fit in. Sometimes you don't even actually fit in completely in your own culture, and he causes a little dissonance for a greater purpose. And I do believe unity is one of the great things. If we are to see the revival and this move of God, this unity has to happen. Doesn't mean that God ignores racial differences, because interestingly, in Revelation, you hear about the tribes and the nations. So God doesn't eradicate that.
God has made us to enrich each other.
Exactly, but we seem to look at it as a divisive thing versus the unity, and I believe that, as you said, the unity has to be a part of that, and God is using.
What do you think are some of the prerequisites in terms of attitudes and heart for that unity to take place within a congregation? Let's say beginning with the minister.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Humility has to begin. It has to begin. We have to humble ourselves, like, it says that Jesus, who being in the form of God, didn't think that he should hold on to his divinity, but came down to human beings and condescended really to men and women of low estate. And so I think humility has to be. If I want to maintain my power and my culture and my way of being, and I'm not able to see the expression of God in somebody else, I think I've missed what kingdom living is all about. And it is going to take, in all of our parts, not just in the dominant culture's part, but all of our parts, of humility. Because when we begin to talk about a multicultural church or a multicultural anything, that means I'm going to have to get uncomfortable a little bit, because there's somebody's going to do things a little bit differently than I'm going to do it. I think that maybe the same is true of marriage, and it's just that idea of giving up your rights. And so I think that it starts with humility.
How about forgiveness on the part of us?
Lord, that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Minorities and blacks, Latinos, and so on, who sometimes feel oppressed or disregarded by the dominant majority. What role do you think?
Oh my Lord, I think it's a crucial role. It's a critical role. I think the message of the gospel is a message of forgiveness. That's central to the gospel. For God so loved that he forgave those who had wronged him. And we have to, as people of color, as whoever we are, really, the message of forgiveness has to be in there, because blame is a big part. I talked about that in the book.
Blame and shame.
Blame and shame is a big part of the human psyche. It has been with us from the beginning. It's easy to blame somebody else for my problems. And God comes to Adam and Eve, and one says the other, it's her fault, and it goes back down to the serpent. And of course, Satan, he uses that against us. He blames us all the time, and we try to defer the blame to somebody else. And so we have to face the fact that we all need to be forgiven and to forgive.
In your book, you speak a lot about idolatry.
Yes.
and how idolatry sometimes brings us into a position of weakness personally,
Yes.
and of loss and failure,
Yes.
and therefore we get into the whole thing of blame and shame and so on and so forth, because
Yes.
we're trying to make up for our own
Yes.
deficiencies, that our own idolatry, and seeking false gods and trying
Exactly.
to find
Yes.
satisfaction in other things.
Exactly.
It leads us into those
It
games.
yes, this game, and
pointing.
I use the analogy, and it probably is it's kind of in a sense humorous. In I use the analogy of my computer, how it becomes so addicted. It became a god to me, and I was bowing at the computer, and God showed me and convicted me that I was bowing down to this god, and I couldn't begin my day without jumping. I'd jump on the computer before I would pray, and I'm very vulnerable and honest, and I would kind of justify myself by saying, God, I'm doing your work. This is about ministry. This is about getting information so I can be more effective as a minister. And God says, no, that you have put this God before me. And then again, when we experience, as the book talks about, and you mentioned, when we experience lacks in our lives, or the enemy is able to encroach in our lives, then we want to blame God or blame somebody else. And God is saying, no, if you understand, my original design is that you seek me first. You get to know me first. You fill the empty voids and the empty places has to be filled with me. And so whenever we seek to fill it with anything else, there's a whole lot of dysfunction that happens.